Hello and welcome. My name is Ken Ingalls, and I'm here to present my final paper for the class INSTTECH 5131. So let's begin. The topic of my paper was studying one-to-one initiative rollouts in schools. One of the reasons why I chose this is my school, the Cedar Falls Community School District, is doing it. And I had questions about the training and how to be most effective with this rollout considering we're starting in the fall. So it was a topic that interested me. I also want to know how other schools have exceeded doing this. And sort of what I found on my research, and I'll highlight this later, is there's three main consistent factors that exist. But my topic is one-to-one rollout in schools and how it improves student engagement. Again, why I chose this topic is because it has a lot of practical usage for myself. As I mentioned, in the fall, our middle school, which is really a junior high, 7, 8, 9, will be rolling out one Chromebook for every student. And I have some apprehension about this program, and I thought taking the time to research what makes a good one-to-one initiative would be really useful for me. Not only for me, but I could also roll it out, I could show it to my team. Being younger, and especially now that people know at my school that I'm taking this master's program, they look to me for a lot of their technological help. And I thought it'd be a great benefit if I could research some of the ways in which one-to-one programs have been successful. And I thought that way I could really be a big help this school year, as I'm sure this will be a big change for everybody. I also like to learn from others' experience. I went to the one-to-one conference here in Iowa, and this is when I first started getting interested in the topic. And I wanted to know, because just giving a kid a computer I didn't think would solve the problem. Just like starting AIW or any other initiative at your school doesn't immediately make your school better. And I was worried that some school districts were making this change just to say that they were part of this elite club where they offered one computer to every school. So not only do I think it's a really cool opportunity, but I want to make sure that it's useful. Finally, I would like to, as I mentioned earlier, better help my team to avoid pitfalls that we had discussed in our course readings. Whether it's Rosen's book talking about how kids are bored with school, or it's Cuban's book about how schools struggle to implement new technology, I wanted to make sure that this implementation of technology was different, at least for my own personal usage. So I thought I should do some further research on it. A primary question that I ask is, how does a school investing in a one-to-one initiative achieve the desired increase in student engagement and productivity? What I wanted to find out is, how do those people that hand computers to every student make sure they increase student engagement? They're not just handing their kids a gaming machine. I'm sure some of the old guard at my school would say that that's what they're doing. So in order to find this, some of my sub-questions were, what do successful schools have in common? What have they done that links them all together that makes sure the students are getting an awesome experience? And finally, how have they avoided burnout? With this question, I'm really looking to try and find, how have teachers bought into the program so that they don't think this is another fad in education reform that will fade, like so many reforms in the past have faded. These are the questions that guided my research. The title I chose for my final paper was Getting the Most Out of Your One-to-One Initiative, Increasing Students' Engagement Through One-to-One Computing. My goal is I want readers of my paper to understand what works when faced with one laptop for each of their students. The focus is really on student engagement. And I chose this topic because I could have gone a way of studying how successful students are on standardized tests, but I was really looking at, how did students feel how successful their one-to-one program was, because I feel like when students feel like it's successful, everybody wins. Here's my research process. At first it was tough. I had to weed out until I got the right sources. There were lots of studies on one-to-one initiatives and rollouts, but all of those studies really originated when one-to-one initiatives became popular. In my research, I found that maybe the first one was in 2002, up in the state of Maine. And since then, lots of educational reform researchers have done case studies on schools that did one-to-one initiatives. But between 2002 and today, 2014, a lot of that research is front-loaded. They did it right away when it was coming out. Secondly, my process, I had to weigh the good with the bad. I was trying to make sure I could juxtapose the case studies with what we had learned in class to come up with a valid argument. What I mean is, I wanted to use the fact that Dr. Rosen says that people are bored in school and try and figure out why that is and how a one-to-one computer might solve that problem. Because according to him, and what we learned in our class, kids are bored at school because we're not reaching that generation in the way that they can be reached or like to be reached. Also, Mr. Cuban in his book writes that schools have failed to implement technology for all these different reasons, whether it be training or teacher buy-in. And I wanted to research what good programs look like and how they implemented and overcame the hurdles that Mr. Cuban talks about. So in my research process, I wanted to keep those in mind while comparing it with what I found out in my new research. And finally, my process was trying to narrow down this topic. I really wanted to focus on what works for student engagement, not necessarily what works for increasing standardized test scores. Being an educator in this field for 3 years, I realized that really student engagement sometimes is more important than how well they score on these standardized test scores. And looking at how they might score on these test scores is too broad of a topic because there's so many different factors that lead to why a kid scores the way they do on a standardized test. I found it a little bit easier to narrow down what increased student engagement with one-to-one laptops. So that was part of my process. Major findings. The first thing I found as a consistent thread throughout the research is that there are 3 major factors in schools that breed success. One is, what expectations do they have for the students in relation to the laptops? What training have teachers received in preparation for the laptop program? And finally, how well is the program supported? In other words, what is the teacher buy-in as to how this program is going to work? If you succeed in those 3 categories, you end up having, more often than not, a successful program. All 3 of these factors are individual, yet they come together interconnected. The idea is, if you don't expect students to use the computers very much, the less the students are benefited. Maybe you don't expect the students to use them very much because you didn't get trained enough in the beginning. In fact, one case claimed that they could predict how successful a program would be based on how much training that the teachers received. And finally, teacher buy-in mattered for levels of collaboration. In other words, teachers didn't collaborate with their teams, therefore, they didn't buy into the program. They didn't see how that it could benefit them. As I pointed out in the previous slide, Cuban said this is a big deal. Teachers have to see that technology is going to physically help their job. And they didn't buy in because they didn't have the training. And because they didn't have the training, they didn't collaborate, and the program slipped. Finally, a major finding I found, which I was surprised a little bit, is that teachers were willing to change. Had they checked off those 3 boxes, student expectations, training, and buy-in, they were willing to change their classroom to meet the needs of this new generation, which is ultimately the goal. The point of this paper is you have to make sure those things fall into place in order to get the most out of your program. Implications for current practice. What I've included here is an image from the AEA 267 here in my district, and it is a map of all the schools that are currently using a one-to-one initiative. If you notice, only the blank spaces are the ones that have 0 initiatives started for one-to-one. The rest of them have some type, whether it be iPads, Chromebooks. If you want to know more about the legend for this map, you can go to the website that I've listed here at the bottom. But basically, what this suggests is the majority. There's more colored in spaces. The majority of Iowa is looking at or has already started to implement a one-to-one program. So this research is going to help those people because it helps those in a one-to-one program, whether it's their first year, their 10th year now, they can make that program better. And the research was really geared at that. How can I help myself or how can I help others increase the effectiveness or increase the student engagement in a one-to-one program? Other current practices that this would help, that this research would help, is the idea that we are not in this alone. A lot of times people feel like this must only be happening in my classroom. But it's not true. There's already been schools out there that have failed at the one-to-one program, or all but failed. And by looking at it through this research, you can feel like, wow, I'm not doing so bad. Then you can also find that there's lots of collaborative tools that will be emerging. In other words, if I need a way to present my history topic in a brand new way, I can use the internet to do that, and it will already have been created because these one-to-one programs are producing a lot of material. There's conferences and seminars about this topic. I know there's an entire conference in Iowa dedicated to the one-to-one initiative. And finally, I think that this research proves this is an education reform policy that makes education better. Sure, it takes some work, but it's one that's worth working on, and it's going to stick around for a long time. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and I know I've learned a lot through my research. Thank you.